Next speaker is Graham Hancock. We really appreciate what's happening this afternoon and this morning with these incredible presentations that reveal the shadows of our past and help us understand that we are perhaps, as Graham Hancock says, a species with amnesia. Could we have an Earthkeeper round of applause for the incredible Graham Hancock?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed for that warm welcome. So look, the past 8 months, I've been writing this. 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. 180,000 words, done the night before I left England. Fine, I've been through all the edits, satisfied my editors, we're going into production. But then there was the little matter of the talk that I do here. Well, I had a little lull and I did some work on it earlier on, and I came back to it on the plane. I did 6 hours on the plane, on the talk. Got off the plane, total exhaustion, arrived in Little Rock, sleep. Then the next morning, which was Friday, up at 8, sat there, 20 hours until 4 o'clock in the morning. And that's what I'm going to give you today. So I have a feeling that it's going to be a bit rough. And I only hope it's a rough diamond. I've had some neurological issues in the last year, very severe seizures, which nearly killed me in 2017. Lost some memory. So I've had to put a bit more text on the screen than I normally do. I know you're going to bear with me. Thank you. This is my beautiful wife, Santa. Santa's a photographer. She prefers not to stand, apparently. Santa's a photographer. She's an incredible human being. I would be nowhere and nothing. I would have done nothing with my life. I would have fallen into a black hole long ago if it had not been for this amazing woman. You know, people say it in book dedications, I couldn't have done this without my wife. This time is really true. I could not be functional as a human being without this amazing teacher, this amazing artist, this amazing creative genius, Santa, in my life. So thank you, Santa. Thank you. And thank you for keeping me on the right track. Okay. Clovis first. This was the reigning model of North American prehistory and American prehistory, really since the 1930s or 40s. And the notion was that a culture that they called the Clovis culture suddenly appear in North America about 13,600 years ago. They have these amazing weapons that you recognize by this fluting, these little flutes cut out of them. They don't actually know exactly what that was for, but these are quite high-tech Stone Age weapons. It seems that the flutings help to absorb the shock of impact. And it also may have been a way that they used these as detachable spearheads. So they would put it onto a spearhead, throw the spear, and then pull the wooden bit of the spear off and leave the head inside the animal. The theory was, absolute rubbish theory, totally gone now, that it was these guys who killed off all the megafauna with their ruthlessly efficient hunting. I don't know a single hunter-gatherer group in the world that kills off its prey animals. They respect them and look after them. This is not what happened in North America. They were supposed to be the first Americans. And this is Blackwater Draw, Portales, New Mexico. This is the Clovis type site, and it was excavated in the 1930s. I'm there with a couple of young archaeologists just last year. You may wonder why it's called Clovis. They couldn't get beer in Portales. But 20 miles down the road is Clovis, New Mexico, where they could. And so they called the culture the Clovis culture. We don't know what they call themselves. And that's the dig is now covered up, but you can see it preserves. It's a very interesting site to visit. I highly recommend it. This is Murray Springs, another of the really important Clovis sites. This picture was taken about 1969, and that's Vance Haynes. Vance Haynes is a very important archaeologist, and he was one of the leading lights behind maintaining the primacy of Clovis first. He insisted that they were the first Americans, that there had been no other Americans before them. He demolished the careers of many people who suggested that there were earlier Americans than Clovis. But one thing I'll say for Vance Haynes, he's a brilliant scholar, and he was disturbed right from the beginning by this black line, and by the fact that under it were the remains of megafauna with Clovis points in them, and that both the megafauna and Clovis disappear after that, and they never come back, and he never believed that it could have been caused by overkill. His view was that something cataclysmic happened to bring an end to the Clovis culture. Well, many archaeologists have been working away at this problem. One of them is Al Goodyear, and Al Goodyear excavated a Clovis site in South Carolina that is called Topper. But when he got down to the bottom of the Clovis lair, he did what until then had been regarded as unnecessary by archaeologists. The archaeologists already knew that there were no human beings in America before Clovis, so what was the point of digging deeper? You know, in archaeology, deeper is older in the strata, the upper stuff is younger than the lower stuff. So he decided to dig deeper. And here I am at the University of South Carolina with Al, and there we are at the Topper site. And down in the digs, you see the Clovis level there, but down here he started finding more evidence of human presence, more tools, more artifacts. And the result was a site judged to be about 50,000 years old. That would be 37,000 years older than Clovis. And then this headline in Nature and across the press last year, the Cerruti Mastodon site is more than 130,000 years old. This is a site near San Diego in California. So Sant and I went over there and we spent some time with Tom Demaray, who's the paleontologist at the San Diego Natural History Museum, who excavated the Cerruti Mastodon find. And Tom Demaray, really a brilliant man. It was a very risky thing. I can't begin to tell you how much fear there is in academia over transgressing boundaries. It was a very risky thing to say that human beings had been in America 130,000 years ago. It was the kind of thing that could destroy a career. But the evidence was insistent, and he gathered a team of other experts, and they worked on that evidence actually for 20 years before they released it. This mastodon was scavenged by human beings 130,000 years ago. That is 10 times as old as Clovis. And Tom took us upstairs to the vaults. It was an Indiana Jones moment, and rolled back these filing cabinets, and there's the Cerruti Mastodon. And he went through it in detail, why the evidence on it, the certain kind of fractures, the bones, the teeth, everything that was left there is undoubtedly the work of human beings. Not everybody accepts that. Nature accepted it. Nature will not publish an article unless it's solidly peer-reviewed first. But it was a controversial issue. Now think of it. If we're looking at Americas, North and South America, that have been inhabited by human beings for 130,000 years, instead of just for 13,000 years. And nobody's been looking at that interval between 13,000 years ago and 130,000 years ago. Chances are there's some big missing bits of our backstory hidden in that time frame. So it's really important to consider the implications of this. It changes everything. It changes not just American history, it changes world history. Human beings were not, anatomically modern human beings were not in Europe until 60,000 years ago. If they were in America twice that long, we need to be looking at the whole history of the Americas again and considering the possibility that we've been getting it badly wrong. And that's exactly what Tom Demaray's view is, that we need to look at a settlement of the Americas in the previous deglaciation, not in the most recent one. A lot of genetics research has been going on, and what can this tell us about the first Americans? Well, it's long been the view of geneticists that there was a single, common, pretty recent origin for Native Americans. And they came as migrants across the Bering Land Bridge during lowered sea levels. The Bering Straits were dry. This was called, archaeologists call it Beringia, from Northeast Asia, Siberia, and thence into the Americas. And you see here, there's the standard teaching, possible migration routes. It's the only one way. You come from Siberia, you cross through the Beringia, come down into North America, and then into South America. But in the past 5 years, frankly, this orthodox view has just begun to fall apart at the seams. Well, one big puzzle, great surprise, National Geographic, Native Americans have West Eurasian origins. Eske Willerslev at the University of Copenhagen, the DNA specialist, says he really wasn't expecting anything like this. But others in this room will disagree with me, but I do not believe that this was anything to do with the so-called Solutreans or any other fantasy European master race. It's time, people of white skin got over it. We have this issue about white master races. It is such utter bullshit. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. The color of a person's skin is the single least important aspect of a human being. Why do we focus so much attention on that? I detest these fantasies of white master races. Anyway, genetic investigations have explained this European contribution to Native American genes. There was, mysteriously, a large migrant population of European origin already settled in Siberia long before migrations from Siberia into the Americas began. The migrants carried their European heritage with them, mixed with their Siberian East Asian heritage. This doesn't disturb the single common origin hypothesis. But this does. Another great surprise. This is a sensational headline from a sensational newspaper in England called the Daily Mail. Were Aborigines the first Americans? Native tribes in the Amazon found to be closely related to indigenous Australians. Well, actually, the scientific evidence behind the sensational headlines, if anything, is even more sensational than the headlines. Genetic evidence for 2 founding populations in the Americas. This is Nature, 3rd of September 2015. And I'll cut to the chase. What they're finding is that there's a strong genetic connection between Australo-Melanesians and certain groups in the Amazon jungle. But there's no trace of those genes up here. And this is a real problem, because if those migrants came this way, they should have left a genetic fingerprint in North America, but they didn't. They ended up in South America. How could that be? How can we explain that? How can we explain this connection between these 2 incredibly distant parts of the world? This part and this part. Just please, if you don't mind, keep this information in mind for a moment. Let's take a side trip to Siberia. The mystery we confront is, how did Australo-Melanesian DNA get to the Amazon? We're used to the idea of our ancestors interbreeding with Neanderthals. I didn't stop there. We were interbreeding with another human species too. Not anatomically modern, a bit different from us, but close enough to interbreed. The same species, you can't breed with other species. And they are now called the Denisovans. And this is because of the discovery of actually a single pinky bone in a cave in Siberia. They found more since. They're regarded as a sister group to the Neanderthals, and certain human populations today carry Denisovan genes. Now, again, the Mail. Were ancient Denisovans the first to discover Australia? Traces of their DNA and Aboriginal people suggest they beat Homo sapiens to the continent. And the weird thing is that Denisovan DNA is found nowhere near Denisova Cave in Siberia today. In fact, the Siberian peoples carry the lowest amounts of Denisovan DNA of almost anybody in the world. It's found here in massive quantities in Southeast Asia and Australia and Melanesia. And that involved crossing the Wallace Line. This involved ocean crossings. For Denisovan DNA to have got here, somebody was crossing oceans tens of thousands of years ago. And if they could cross to Australia, could they maybe cross further? Could they cross all the way to South America? So this is Denisova Cave, where the prehistory of the human species is being rewritten. There's a nice little sign there now by the side of it, Denisova Cave. There it is in the middle of Siberia, and that's the entrance to it. Just looking up into the cave. Seems to have been a kind of workshop, actually, for a very long time. Neanderthals lived there. Denisovans lived there. Anatomically modern humans lived there as well. They made stuff in there, but feels like a kind of cathedral. There's a little smoke hole up there, nicely formed natural karst cave, looking down to the Anhui River. And looking into the central excavation trench. One of the things that they dug out actually of the East Gallery is this amazing bracelet made of chloritolite. It is a piece of high symbolic art. It's extremely beautiful. It's the kind of thing that is associated only with anatomically modern humans, and really in a way with, not even in the Paleolithic, but in the Neolithic, the more recent time. But here it is 50,000 years old in Denisova Cave. And it was made to fit on a slim wrist. It would have been a torque. It was slipped on sideways. And a little pendant hung from it. And they see that the hole that that pendant was slung through was drilled. And it was drilled with a stationary drill, moving at very high speed. Again, this is a technology. It's not what we would call high technology today, but it's a technology that is utterly out of place 50,000 years ago. It's a technology we associate with the Neolithic 8,000 years ago. What's it doing in this cave 50,000 years ago? Oh, this is the lovely couple we stayed with at the village of Topolnoye during our visit to Denisova Cave. Again, you know, states and nations are causing a lot of menace in the world. But when you get down to the level of human beings, we're all the same. We all get the same hopes, the same fears, the same love. There's no reason to hate anybody in this planet. There's no time for it. No time for it. Love it here. So, to reiterate, Denisovan DNA survives in its highest quantities today amongst Australo-Melanesians. And then there's this unexplained Australo-Melanesian signal in the Amazon rainforest. I was able to discuss this with Professor Eske Willislev, who I cited earlier, and his recent work focuses on the peopling of the Americas. I'm just going to, forgive me for reading this, but I asked him what he made of this Australo-Melanesian DNA signal in the Amazon, because he's one of the key researchers in revealing it. And he said, currently no one has a good explanation for the Australo-Melanesian signal. All that is put forward as possible explanations are purely speculative. What we do know is that it's present in some Native American groups, particularly from Brazil. We also know it has to be pre-Columbian. He gave me a number of explanations, but one of them was this. Someone holding this signal comes into the Americas, not through Beringia, but crossing into South America across the ocean. Based purely on the genetic data, this is the most parsimonious explanation, but it doesn't make practical sense. 2 points here. Scientists are always looking for parsimony. The simplest and most direct explanation is usually the right one. And what Eske is saying is that the simplest and most direct explanation for this isolated Australo-Melanesian DNA signal in the Amazon is that somebody sailed the Pacific Ocean 13,000, 14,000 years ago, crossed into the Amazon, and interbred with the peoples there. But he says it doesn't make practical sense because we know, don't we, that nobody could cross the ocean 13,000 or 14,000 years ago. This has been established by archaeologists. Well, I would be careful about anything that archaeologists say they've established. Archaeology does some great work, but I think this is my new rule of thumb from my own observations. Any and every archaeological finding should be regarded as provisional. It's very rare that they aren't changed as time goes on. I asked Willislev, did he base his conclusion about impracticality on the consensus that Upper Paleolithic and early Holocene ancestors were incapable of undertaking long transoceanic voyages? He said, well, he's actually open to that possibility, but he's just not seen any archaeological evidence for it. And I asked him to comment on the strength of the Australo-Melanesian signal amongst certain people of the Amazon, such as the Surui, and its complete absence in North America. Did this mean there was a higher level of Denisovan DNA amongst Amazonian peoples with heightened levels of Australo-Melanesian DNA? I'd assumed that the strong Denisovan DNA signal in Australia and Melanesia would obviously imply a higher level of DNA, Denisovan DNA in the Amazon. But strangely and seemingly counterintuitively, this turns out not to be the case. Professor Willislev replied that to his knowledge, which is very extensive on this matter, the Denisovan signal, quote, is not stronger in the Surui than amongst any other Native American peoples. So we therefore confront a double mystery. One, how did that Australo-Melanesian DNA get to the Amazon? And two, how did it get there without including the significant Denisovan signal that otherwise characterizes Australo-Melanesian DNA? To cut a long story short, I think the most parsimonious solution is right. I think we are looking at a small group of settlers who were brought across the Pacific Ocean as some deliberate project. I think there's been a hidden hand at work in history. I think there was resettlement of peoples going on in this very turbulent time around 13,000 years ago. And my proposal is that a small group were brought across the Pacific Ocean by an as yet unknown hand and settled in the Amazon. So let's take a look at the Amazon. Amazon basin covers roughly 7 million square kilometers. Tragic clearances have reduced the rainforest, but there's still 5.5 million square kilometers covered by rainforest, and that's an area larger than the entire subcontinent of India. That is an area that has hardly been studied by archaeology at all. 5.5 million square kilometers of the Earth's surface hardly studied by archaeology. How can archaeology be drawing conclusions about our past when there's that big missing area that they just haven't really looked at all? Back in the 1540s, well, Francisco de Orellana was a Spanish conquistador. He took a little group of guys hunting in a longboat up on the upper Amazon here. They were supposed to, actually they were on an expedition looking for El Dorado, but I don't have time to go into that. They were going to gather food for the rest of their companions and come back in 12 days, but the Amazon disagreed. The Amazon carried them the whole way from the west of South America to the east and dumped them in the Atlantic Ocean, 4,000 miles. And on that journey, they reported seeing huge cities, an incredible culture and civilization, and amazing arts and crafts. And ever afterwards, they were regarded as liars. They must have just made it up, just like they made up the story about the Amazons, because they said there were female warriors there who used bows and arrows, who ferociously attacked them, and who the peoples of the Amazon followed. So that's how the Amazon became called the Amazons, after the Amazon after the Greek myth. Otherwise, I suppose it would be called the Orellana. Anyway, he sees these cities, he's accused of lying. The clearances in the last 20 years have shown he told the truth. That the Amazon was indeed full of cities, thriving, populous cities. And why weren't they there 100 years later after Orellana? Because of smallpox. Because of what Westerners brought into the Amazon, the destructive epidemics that just utterly wiped out the population of the Amazon, leaving nothing, and the cities were eaten up by the jungle and crumbled away and disappeared. We're rediscovering them now. A miracle, terra preta, black earth. It's generally regarded that the Amazon is a kind of infertile area, but there are areas of high fertility within it, incredible fertility. These soils are incredibly old. They go back at least 8,000 years. I believe they go back much further than that. You can still take a piece of terra preta and dump it into barren soil, and it will revitalize that soil and make it productive again. It's an entirely man-made soil. It was made by human beings. It was designed. It was a scientific project to make that area productive for human settlement. It's an amazing mystery. More than 150,000 different species of plants and trees in the Amazon, and more evidence of science amongst shamans, working, for example, with the visionary brew ayahuasca. The dimethyltryptamine is in the leaves of this plant. They call it chacruna in the Amazon. But when you take dimethyltryptamine orally, it has no effect because there's an enzyme in the gut called monoamine oxidase that switches off DMT, the most powerful hallucinogen known to man, that switches it off on contact. So if you want to take DMT orally rather than smoking it, what you need to do is you need to have a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. And we're getting into quite complicated areas of chemistry here, but they figured it out in the Amazon. Out of those 150,000 different species of plants and trees, if you put this together with this vine, if you mix the two of them together and cook them up, turns out the vine, the ayahuasca vine, contains that monoamine oxidase inhibitor. So what you're getting is orally active DMT, which produces a 4-hour mystical trance journey, rather than 12 minutes instantly in and out of another reality, which the smoked version does. To create something like this is not easy. This is a work of science we're looking at, high science and ethnopharmacology. So they cook it up in a pot and they brew it, and you end up with this truly disgusting tasting brew, but which unleashes the most extraordinary and life-changing experiences. And lest anyone doubt, I've had about 70 ayahuasca sessions myself over the last 15 years, lest anybody doubt the effectiveness of this ancient Amazonian science, just talk to the thousands of people who've been cured of all manner of psychiatric and psychological conditions as a result of working with ayahuasca. Forget about big pharma. Forget about the psychiatrist inventing a new medical condition, a new psychiatric condition every week. The shamans knew how to deal with this ceremony and this amazing brew. And this is science. This is not simple matter at all. Same with curare, you know, neurotoxin, a muscle toxin. Curare actually involves 11 different plants. It doesn't work unless you put them all in there together. And again, how they figured out which were the right plants to use to produce this stuff. I mean, curare is the basis of modern anesthesia as well. Is, to my mind, evidence of a lost science. And then there's the mystery of the geoglyphs. Those clearances in the Amazon have revealed huge earthworks, very old ones, that nobody suspected were there, like this one, Santa Teresina, and Fazenda Parana, which is perfectly oriented to true north, south, east, and west. Fazenda Colorado, Fazenda Atlantica. All of these were under dense rainforest. They've been exposed because of the clearances of the forest to make way for cattle ranches and soybean farms. Tequino. Well, as I said, Fazenda Parana is aligned to true north, south, east, and west. Severino Calazans, at the right, has the same footprint as the Great Pyramid of Giza, measuring 230 meters along each side, and it's also oriented to astronomical true north. So somebody was doing astronomy back there in the Amazon. The problem is we're faced by a shortage of research. There's an interesting cave art at a place called Pedra Pintada. It's an excavated rock shelter excavated in 1996. No astronomical survey carried out there, but 400 meters away, another cave, Pedra Pintado, Painel do Pilau, dated to the same period, has definite astronomical alignments. Just the kind of basics, you know, the Earth's orbit around the sun. The equinoxes are when the Earth is broadside onto the sun in the northern hemisphere. The June solstice is when the North Pole points most directly towards the sun, and the December when the North Pole points directly away from the sun. These are the four key moments of the year, the two solstices and the two equinoxes. I'm not going to go into the details here. Please just accept it. It's a thoroughly sourced paper, solar-aligned pictographs at Painel do Pilau along the lower Amazon River at Monte Alegre, Brazil. It's Christopher Sean Davis, Northern Illinois University. He's pointing out that these ancient people took advantage of the natural layout of the land. They found certain connections to the sky and the natural layout, and they highlighted those connections with art. And indeed, they observed the sun for 18 to 20 days before and after the winter solstice, and they kept a tally of it here so that they could home in right exactly on the winter solstice. And here we have another alignment which aligns with 270 degrees west. Basically, you know the word azimuth. A lot of us don't know what azimuth means. A lot of us do. But azimuth, basically 0 degrees is north, and you just go around the clock. 90 degrees is east, 180 degrees is south, 280 degrees is 70 degrees is west. So azimuth 270 is the direction of the setting sun on the equinox. There's the back of the Great Sphinx. This is the view that you get if you climb up illegally on the back of the Great Sphinx at pretty much any time of year. If you were here at the summer solstice, the sun would rise over here. Winter solstice, it would rise over here. But if you do the same thing on the equinox, you see that the Sphinx is gazing directly at the rising sun on the spring equinox. The Great Sphinx is an equinoctial marker. It's a natural piece of bedrock which has been cut and shaped. They must have observed that it already faced the sun, and they shaped it and formed it, and we end up with the Sphinx. Angkor Wat does the same thing. It also aligns with the equinox sunrise, magical moment. Also back at Painel de Palau, we have alignments to the solstices in the rock art. And we have stone circles in the Amazon. This is Rego Grande, the Amazonian Stonehenge. Stone 3 tracks the path of the sun throughout the day on the winter solstice. Stones 1 and 2 line up to target the winter solstice sunrise. So here's an ancient stone circle with a focus on the solstices. Temple of Karnak in Upper Egypt. Stand there at dawn on the winter solstice, watch the sunrise, and you'll discover why the axis is aligned. That 1 kilometer long axis is aligned in the way it is, because it is targeting the rising sun on the winter solstice. So this is a meme, if you like, a kind of idea that reproduces itself all around the world to create structures on the ground that marry earth and sky. And where possible, if there is already a natural formation that does that, if earth is already speaking to sky, take advantage of that natural formation, enhance it, develop it, manifest its power. Interestingly, amongst the Amazonian geoglyphs are a number with oval groups of mounds which are oriented to the northwest. And that suggests a solstitial orientation, but no astronomical survey has been carried out. So there are two giant river basins of the Americas. One of them, of course, is the Amazon, and the other is the Mississippi River Basin. These maps are not to scale. The Amazon is much bigger than the Mississippi River Basin. Amazon Basin, 7.5 million square kilometers. Mississippi Basin, about 2.9 million square kilometers. Pretty big, though, pretty big. The Mississippi is a massive river system, as we all know. So were I to take the flight from Manaus in the middle of the Amazon to St. Louis, I'm told by Google it would cost me 1,914 pounds, and that it would take me 10 hours and 50 minutes on a modern aircraft to go between these two areas. Let's not go to St. Louis immediately, but let's go to the lower Mississippi Valley down in Louisiana. There we find a number of extremely ancient sites, earthwork sites, which feature mounds. The best known of them is Watson Break, which suggests that mound building in North America may have begun as early as 3,590 BC. That's 6,000 years ago. Caney Mounds, 3,600 to 3,000 BC. Frenchman's Bend, 3,570 BC. Hedgepeth Mound, about 7,000 years ago. Montesano, 7,000 to 7,500 years ago. Conley, 7,500 to 8,000 years ago. So first of all, let's be clear. The mound building phenomenon in North America is not young. The mound building phenomenon in North America, which we are familiar with in giant sites like Cahokia and Poverty Point, they are the end product of a long story in North America. Let's never forget that story when we look at the more dramatic, more recent sites. That's the location of Watson Break in Louisiana. So what Watson Break does is it joins Earth to sky. It's full of equinoctial and solstitial sightlines. In fact, the very width of the site seems to have been defined by those. And this is from Norman Davis's Solar Alignments at Watson Break, Louisiana Archaeology, 2012. And here's LIDAR confirmation and refinement of the solstitial alignments in the Davis survey by William Romaine. William Romaine is one of the really great figures in this field. He's a really remarkable archaeologist who's doing fantastic work, mainly up in Ohio. And I highly recommend that you look out for what William Romaine is doing, because he's one of the great thinkers in this field. Does a lot of work with LIDAR, and we can see how perfectly Watson Break actually is oriented to the summer solstice sunset and the winter solstice sunrise, because these alignments are reciprocal. If you're aligned to the summer solstice sunset in one direction, you're aligned to the winter solstice sunrise in the other direction. More on Watson Break. That's a pen and ink interpretation of an imagined ceremony taken there by John Gibson, an archaeologist. And again, this oval pattern and the orientation to the northwest. There's evidence for a shared geometrical system at Watson Break and at Caney Mounds, and it seems to be defined around the angle of 60 degrees, which turns out to be the angle of the summer solstice sunset and the winter solstice sunset. So we have to wonder whether the same thing is going on at these mounds in South America. Anybody know where this is? That is indeed Cahokia. It's Monk's Mound. And when you get to the top of it, you get this interesting view of mounds, ancient ones, mounds, modern ones, and the wonderful St. Louis skyline in the background there. That's what you see from the top of Monk's Mound. And there it is. It's the largest pyramid in the Americas north of Mexico. It was made around 1050 AD. It's less than 1,000 years old, probably. They've been made a bit older. But it's a direct inheritor of the ancient traditions which were here brought to fruition. So this is Monk's Mound viewed from the east looking west. And there is a detail of Monk's Mound at the top. And looking from Cahokia's Woodhenge on the west towards the east, and Monk's Mound in the east. It's interesting that Cahokia has a woodhenge. Stonehenge in England had a woodhenge too. It seems that a lot of monumental astronomical sites involved wooden posts as well as megaliths, and we find that at Cahokia. And here William Romain is showing how it all works. There's the center post, there's the equinox marker, there's the solstice markers, and that's how the equinox sunrise looks rising above the southern terrace of Monk's Mound, photographed from Woodhenge. And there's a map of the whole Cahokia Mounds Historic Park. Oddly, it's tilted 5 degrees east of true north. It isn't set true north, but 5 degrees east of true north. And William Romain offers an interesting suggestion. It's almost too complicated for my tired brain to grapple with at the moment. But basically what you do is, to get a root 2 rectangle, you extend the opposite sides of a square to the length of the square's diagonal. And if you take such a rectangle, orient it to true north, and then rotate it eastwards by 5 degrees to match the axis at Cahokia, its diagonals turn out to align very closely with important solar and lunar events as viewed from Monk's Mound. Summer solstice sunrise, the winter solstice sunset, the moon's southern rising position, the moon's maximum northern setting position. So it seems that mathematicians, geometers were at work at Cahokia. And then let's go back to the Amazon. Here's an earthwork that no longer exists in Pike County, Ohio, mapped by Squire and Davis in 1848. It's squaring the circle. We have a square within a circle here. And here at Jacosá in the Amazon, one of those Amazonian earthworks doing the same thing, except the square is outside the circle. So they're squaring the circle in the Amazon, and they're squaring the circle in Pike County, Ohio. And hey, we thought the Greeks invented that stuff. What's happening here? What's happening here in America? This is Avebury. I happen to live very near Avebury in the UK. That's the Great Circle at Avebury, and then the Serpentine causeways leading to it. And within the Great Circle, there were 2 interior circles. Not much of it is left today, but just recently, they discovered within the southernmost of the 2 internal circles that there had been a square formation of megaliths. So they were squaring the circle at Avebury as well. It's strange, we keep finding these same memes cropping up all around the world. These are the Newark works in Licking County, Ohio. Notable features are this huge octagon and circle, another great circle here, and a square here. And that's actually an aerial photograph which shows the circle-octagon combination of the Newark earthworks in Ohio. Unfortunately, the bits, or perhaps fortunately because it's meant they've been preserved, the bits that have survived are now all inside a private golf club. It's an 18-hole course, and it promotes itself as unlike any other in the world. It is designed around famous prehistoric Native American earthworks that come into play on 11 of the holes. Okay. So there's this incredible ancient site, which is now a golf course. There's the Newark Great Circle. This is so-called Eagle Mound in the center of it. The diameter of the circle is 365.9 meters. It's a bit bigger than the Avebury Great Circle, which is 347.4 meters, but both are true henges. A henge, you understand, is the ditch with the embankment, and the embankment is outside the ditch. This is how we know they're not used for defensive purposes, because if you want to defend something, you put your moat outside your embankment. You don't put it inside the embankment. Avebury, the British henges, and the Amazonian henges are true henges in that sense. I'll remind you of this site from the Amazon. Let's just compare the general look of it. It's not as fine as the Newark earthworks, but it's the same kind of thing, an octagon and a circle joined together. I'm sorry I have to keep turning my back, but I just need to read my stuff here. Okay, so Newark's Great Square left, its perimeter is equal to the circumference of the Great Circle, while its area is equal to the area of the observatory circle. Again, mathematicians are at work behind the scenes. This kind of stuff doesn't happen by accident. Okay, and then I'm not even going to get into this, but you know, the sun has its maximum positions, its solstices, and the moon has its standstills too, furthest north and furthest south. It has maximum and minimum standstills. It takes a lot of observations. It's an 18.6-year cycle. You have to really pay attention to the sky to get it. Most of us don't know this happens at all, but somebody was paying attention to it up in Newark, because this entire thing, this octagon and circle combination, is designed to target those lunar standstills, and to do so with incredible precision. And you get this just beautiful effect, simulation of maximum northern moonrise at Newark as viewed along the observatory circle octagon axis. What's it all about? What were they doing all this stuff for? What was all this incredible work being done for? What was going on here? Well, there's a clue from the Amazon. We're back with that powerful visionary brew called Ayahuasca. Ayahuasca, by the way, means the vine of the dead, or the vine of souls. Chicano are amongst the native Amazonian peoples who drink ayahuasca, and after they've been seeing their ayahuasca visions, when they come back to everyday consciousness, they'll often paint or depict the visions they've seen, and very frequently it involves geometry. Chicano shaman makes a sand painting of patterns seen under ayahuasca visions. Now look, not any member, I don't know why I said not, any member of the Chicano community can drink ayahuasca, but it's the payes, the shamans, who are the specialists. And where matters of greatest importance must be resolved, a group of shamans will work together, and they'll consume massive quantities of ayahuasca until they reach a point lying in their hammocks. I'm quoting Gerardo Reichel Dolmatov here, the shaman and the jaguar. He's a major anthropologist studying the Tucano. And he said they reach a point lying in their hammocks where, quote, they feel they are ascending to the Milky Way. The ascent to the Milky Way is not easily accomplished. An apprentice will hardly ever be able to rise immediately to this sublunary region, but rather will learn to do so after many trials. At first, he will barely rise over the horizon. The next time, perhaps he will reach a point corresponding to the position of the sun at 9 a.m., then at 10 a.m., and so on until at last, in a single soaring flight, he will reach the zenith. So, in summary, ayahuasca is a kind of portal for these shamans. And they go through the ayahuasca portal, and then after sufficient practice, they make a soaring flight or a leap to the Milky Way. But that's not the final goal. It's a way station. Beyond the Milky Way lies the entrance to the other world. And Gerardo Reichel Dolmatov explains, it is said that the individual dies when he drinks the potion, and that now his spirit returns to the uterine regions of the beyond, only to be reborn there and to return to his ordinary existence when the trance is over. This then is conceived as an acceleration of time, an anticipation of death and rebirth. So ayahuasca, in a way, is a kind of book of the dead. It's a guide to the death experience, but it's a guide at the level of experience itself. It's not a guide that you read in a book. It's a guide that you experience. Now, Fazenda, Colorado, has this curious structure. Here is a Tucano visionary art depicting the entrance to the other world, said to lie beyond the Milky Way. And oddly enough, it looks exactly like this bit of that huge geoglyph in the Amazon. Could these geoglyphs have been connected to the mystery of death, to finding out what happens to us when we die? New research by a group of leading scholars of ancient American civilization has settled the matter as far as North American sites are concerned. The Mississippians were looking for answers to what is perhaps the greatest human mystery. What happens to us when we die? I have to tell you, this was not a question I asked myself often in my 20s. But now that I'm 68, I ask it a bit more. Excuse me if I share some intimate moments with you, because I had my own brush with death in 2017. That's me on a ventilator. I had such severe seizures that Santa was taken aside by the doctor and told that they couldn't manage it and that I was almost certainly going to die. They couldn't stop the seizures. If I lived, she was told I would be probably a vegetable. Anyway, last resort, they put me on a ventilator, shut me down in a full-scale coma, and gradually my body quietened down. 48 hours later, they took the ventilator out, took me off the breathing system, and I came. Thank you. It's a curious experience. I had an earlier brush back when I was 17 years old with near-death. That was a real near-death experience. I had a massive electric shock. Slumped to the floor, actually thrown across a room. I left my body. I'm up around the light. I'm looking down on myself on the ground. I'm thinking, interesting. And then I'm back in my body. I don't get the tunnel of light. I don't get the relative saying it's not your time, but I definitely was not my body. I was outside my body. It's the first time you put a seed in my mind. We are not our bodies. We are not our knees or our stomachs. We are our consciousness. And consciousness may not be entirely an artifact of the body. Actually, I've had an interest in death really since I suppose that experience at the age of 17, but I put it aside for a long time until I came across these texts, the ancient Egyptian funerary texts. The ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead, of course, is the most famous, but the oldest are the ancient Egyptian pyramid texts, inscribed pyramids of the 5th and 6th dynasties at Saqqara. The coffin texts written inside coffin lids, the book of what is in the Duat. The ancient Egyptian afterlife realm was called the Duat, the underworld, and these books sought to prepare you for what you're going to encounter there. See, modern science tells us that when we die, we're dead, it's just the light goes off, there's nothing because we are just meat robots. You know, that is the modern scientific view. I profoundly disagree with that view. I think we should consider ancient wisdom that tells us that death is not the end, but the beginning of another adventure. And like any adventure, it's kind of smart to be prepared. You know, because you might get a real shock, you know, if you're Professor Richard Dawkins and you don't believe in anything and suddenly you find yourself confronted by an afterlife journey. Because that's what goes on, according to the ancient Egyptians who put their best minds to work for 3,000 years on this subject. You know, a lot of people say, nah, don't listen to them, just listen to the scientists. I'd rather listen to the ancients. This was their stuff. And actually, it wasn't really about death, it was about immortal life. It was about the life of millions of years. It was about coming forth into day. But you had to make that afterlife journey. These are the pyramid texts in the Pyramid of Unas at Saqqara. Beautiful, beautiful hieroglyphs. And inside many of the tombs in the Valley of the Kings, you can see depictions of the afterlife journey through the Duat. And in the Duat, this underworld realm, you confront certain riddles, trials, challenges, and ordeals. It's an eerie, parallel universe. It's at once part of the sky, and it's a kind of physical underworld with chambers and galleries and passageways. These are images of the Duat from ancient Egypt. Osiris was identified by the ancient Egyptians with the constellation of Orion. Nobody disputes that. Orion was viewed as the figure of Osiris in the night sky, and he was the ruler of the afterlife realm of the Duat. And it was envisaged as being located in the sky, roughly between the constellations of Leo and Orion, with the great heavenly river of the Milky Way, the winding waterway, as its central feature. So if you go into the... Santa shot this as a double exposure. There's the Great Pyramid in the background. This is the Pyramid of Unas, the chamber of the Pyramid of Unas with those pyramid texts written on the side. I think what they were doing in hieroglyphs in the 5th and 6th dynasties, they were doing in 3 dimensions at the Giza necropolis. You don't find the hieroglyphs there because they've actually manifested the duat on the ground in the Great Pyramids of Giza. There is Santa's aerial shot of the Giza Plateau. Let's come around this side. Giza Plateau, Nile Valley. Great Sphinx looking out over the Nile Valley. My great friend Robert Bauval, the originator of the Orion correlation, which really has changed a lot of thinking on the way that we look at the ancient Egyptians. The curious coincidence of the pattern of the pyramids on the ground and the pattern of the belt stars of Orion. Actually, I don't have time to go into it here, but what they are reproducing on the ground is the Duat sky region. But weirdly, they're reproducing as it looked 12,800 years ago, not as it looked at the time of the ancient Egyptians. And it's not just the outer world of the pyramids. You go inside the pyramids and you find yourself in the realm of the Duat, these ascending galleries, these narrow corridors. You got around the Duat sometimes on boats. That's why there's a boat buried next to the Great Pyramid. And they make it clear, these texts, that the 5th division of the Duat was particularly important, the land of Sokar, or Rostam. And this was the place on the afterlife journey where those who had wasted the gift of life faced annihilation, and those who'd lived their lives well received a judgment that allowed them to move forwards, either to rebirth in human form or to the life of millions of years. It's not by chance that one of the ancient names of Giza was Rostam. Giza was Rostam, the Duat, the 5th division of the Duat, the place where your immortal destiny is decided. It was a simulation of that built on the ground. So how does the soul of the earthly deceased ascend to the Duat? Well, the Egyptians made it pretty clear to us with the southern shaft from the king's chamber, which points directly at Orion's belt. That's how you got to the Duat. You left up to the sky, to Orion's belt beside the Milky Way, and then you made your journey through the Duat along the Milky Way. So Santa and I are at Moundville in Alabama, and we're looking at Mound A. That's Mound A, and you can see more of the mounds. Beautiful site, Moundville, by the way. Highly recommend. Go visit it. Other mounds in the background. We're at Mound A looking at Mound B. And then I see this notice board with writing on it. Let's see what that writing says. At Moundville, an excellent example of a powerful religious image was the hand and eye motif. Moundville's rattlesnake disc, pictured on this notice board, offers us the best known version. Although numerous variations occur in pottery, copper, stone, and shell artifacts. Stories passed down amongst various tribes tell of the dead entering the afterlife through an opening marked by a great warrior's hand in the sky. One account describes that hand as the constellation we know as Orion, with Orion's belt as its wrist, the fingers pointing downwards. A faint cluster of stars in the center of the palm is a portal to the path of souls, or path to the land of the dead. Researchers speculate that the hand and eye represent this constellation. So that's the information on the notice board at Mound B at Moundville. And in the museum, you can see so much more. There's the rattlesnake disc. There's the hand. There's the eye, representing the constellation of Orion. And they tell us all about it. The hand and eye is a prominent Moundville motif, thought to represent part of the constellation we identify as Orion. The serpents are the ropes that join earth to sky, and the palm of the hand is the portal or doorway through which the spirits of the dead can ascend the path of souls, or Milky Way, in their extended journey to the realm of the dead. And they continue here. The gateway or portal between the celestial realms and the earth disk was symbolized artistically rendered as an open hand with an eye in its palm. We know this hand as part of the constellation of Orion. Once the portal was crossed, souls of the dead began their journey by walking along a road or ribbon of light, the Milky Way, and thus enter the underworld. This brought up a lot of deja vu for me, because back in 1998, in our book, Heaven's Mirror, the book I'm most proud of, by the way, and the book that Santa and I worked on together because it features her photographs, we paid attention to the issue of the Milky Way. The Milky Way was a particularly important feature of the heavens in Central America. They conceived of it as a road that led to the netherworld, Xibalba, which in common with other Central American peoples, they located in the sky. I speak of Utatlan, where major temples were oriented to the heliacal setting points in Orion. And the Milky Way, along which Orion stands, was thought of as a celestial path connecting the firmament's navel with the center of the underworld. And again here, the identical mystery lies at the heart of the Egyptian rebirth cult. In Egypt, as amongst the Maya, the stellar context involves Orion and the Milky Way. In Egypt, as in Mexico, a journey through the netherworld must be undertaken by this deceased. In Egypt, as in Mexico, religious teachings assert that life is our opportunity to prepare for this journey, an opportunity that should under no circumstances be wasted. And now suddenly, in Moundville, I'm confronted by exactly the same system of ideas that I found in ancient Egypt and that I found amongst the Maya in Central America. I'm definitely not the first to notice this peculiar coincidence. Andy Collins, who will be speaking next, highlights it on pages 7 to 9 of his foreword to Greg Little's 2014 book, The Path of Souls, The Native American Death Journey. I highly recommend Greg Little's excellent book, The Path of Souls. It's a really fantastic summary of all the latest academic research in this field. And I recommend Greg's encyclopedia of North American mounds as well. He's done amazing research in this field. I don't think that Andy and Greg believe it was a coincidence that it's so similar to the ancient Egyptian system, but no one has yet mounted an in-depth comparative study of ancient Egyptian and ancient Mississippian thinking concerning the afterlife journey of the soul. Could there be a real connection between these two otherwise very different cultures? Very different, because they're not only separated by geography, they're separated by time. Moundville is 1,000 years ago. Ancient Egypt is thousands of years before that. How do we explain this if there is a similarity? So in America, before I go into this in some depth and detail. So there's the Native American hand constellation, and there's the hand and eye. The portal is reckoned to be the Orion Nebula that lies beneath the belt stars. And George Langford, who's an internationally recognized authority on Native American folklore, anthropology, religious studies, and ethnohistory, notes the portal in the hand must be entered by a leap at the optimum time as Orion is setting and it comes close to the Earth disk. That's the moment when the soul can leap up to the constellation of Orion, rather as the soul leapt to the constellation of Orion in the ancient Egyptian system. In ancient Egypt, the hieroglyph for the Duat netherworld depicts a hole in the sky with a star at its center. Ancient Native America, George Langford, the hole in the sky is indicated as a slit being pulled apart, and the fact that it is celestial is frequently elaborated by the inclusion of a star circle or dot. So the Mississippians represented a star as a circle or dot, the ancient Egyptians as a star, but both of them are indicating a portal in the sky. George Langford is actually one of the leading scholars in the group who've so successfully cracked the Mississippian Code. Here is one of his chapters in Ancient Objects and Sacred Realms, a very important book. And he speaks of amongst the Mississippian iconography and traditions, he speaks of the fearsome image of a brain smasher, usually a woman, whose task is to destroy memory and humanity by removing or smashing the brain. Actually, there are repeated references to this menacing female figure, usually called the brain smasher or the brain taker, in accounts of the Native American afterlife journey. Her role is the annihilation and permanent destruction of unworthy souls, of the damned, on the afterlife journey. Reminder of the fifth division of the Duat. In the fifth division of the Duat, there is a very curious scene. Here is an individual who appears to be smashing his own head with an axe. And standing above him is a goddess holding out her hands. My instinct looking at this is, I don't think she's trying to stop him. I think she's exerting will. I think she's making him do that to himself. She's making him smash out his own brains. Wallace Budge describes it thus: a goddess standing upright with her hands stretched out to the top of the head of a man who's kneeling before her and is cutting open his head with a hatchet. But he doesn't provide a translation of the relevant hieroglyphs. I thought it would be a good test of this notion that there's some deep structural connection between ancient Egypt and ancient Mississippi. If this is the brain smasher that we're looking at in ancient Egypt, whose job was to destroy the damned in Native America, then that should be her job in ancient Egypt too. So I went to the British Museum and I got Louise Ellis Barrett at the British Museum to translate those hieroglyphs for me. She lives from the blood of the damned and from what these gods provide her, the Ba soul who belongs to the damned, the demolishing one who cuts the damned to pieces. In other words, that goddess is doing exactly the same thing as the brain smasher figure in the Native American traditions. Okay, I'm sure Andy will be talking later about the star Deneb, but George Langford, again, that amazing folklorist, identifies the star Deneb and Cygnus as a whole with another figure in the Moundville repertoire. And that figure is a raptor who's an adversary on the journey of the soul with the power to block its further progress by forcing it to take a path culminating at a dead end. In the ancient Egyptian pyramid texts, the soul on its journey through the Duat is confronted by a bird adversary that apparently has the power to block its path. It's difficult to give any other interpretation to this encounter, since the soul is made to declare, look, I know an ostrich isn't a raptor, okay? The soul is made to declare, hail to you, ostrich, which is on the bank of the winding waterway, open my way that I may pass. And likewise, what else but recognition of the same fork in the Milky Way that was regarded as so ominous in Native America can be expressed in the pyramid texts, where we read, do not travel on those western waterways, for those who travel there on do not return, but travel on the eastern waterways. There are monstrous serpents in both netherworlds, the Mississippian netherworld and the ancient Egyptian netherworld. Sometimes serpents with legs. There are many descriptions of those in the Native American tradition, and sometimes serpents with wings, like this in ancient Egypt. And we have monstrous winged serpents in the ancient American netherworld. And here's the underwater panther. He's another very important figure in the Mississippian iconography. And bottom left, we see the Great Sphinx of Giza, bottom right, and bottom left, a detail of the tail. This underwater panther figure looks a lot to me like the Great Sphinx, I have to say, just on a rather different scale. The Great Sphinx also had his menacing aspects. The Birdman, hero deity of the Mississippians. And here's a statue of the ancient Egyptian hero deity Horus. The fundamental role of both was to symbolize the triumph of life over death. There's a lot of geometry and astronomy in the ancient Egyptian afterlife. You go through those pyramid texts, that book of what is in the Duat, Coven text in detail, you're going to find it filled with geometry and astronomy. What is it doing there? And does it shed light on the geometry and astronomy in the Native American monuments where we have no written traditions? Both the ancient Egyptian and the Native American systems culminated in a judgment. They had a strong element of judgment. The entire ordeal actually concerns the judgment of the soul for its choices, for what we've done and what we've not done, for the use that we've made of the gift of life. In both cases, the unworthy soul can face annihilation by gods, demons, and monsters at any point on the journey, for example, at the hands of the brain smasher figure. But in both cases also, for those who've progressed thus far through the netherworld, a specific judgment awaits. For the ancient Egyptians, life was really about preparing for this moment. Knowledge of the books of the dead was a vital part of this preparation and would help the soul to triumph over the adversaries on its path and thus to achieve cosmic immortality amongst the stars. The Moundville iconography and associated oral traditions serve exactly the same purpose. Ancient Egyptian priests wearing a leopard skin mantle on which the spots represented stars played a key role in mortuary ceremonies to prepare the deceased for the afterlife journey. At the center, we see the high priest of Heliopolis, the cult center of the Giza pyramids. He was titled the chief of the astronomers, and he wore a mantle adorned with stars. And right here is a Skidi Pawni, astronomer chief, also wearing a mantle adorned with stars. I don't think it's a coincidence. Now, what are we looking at here? Difficult to say, isn't it? Let's keep going. Ooh, some little windy things going on here. Oh, what's this? You know what? You have to get up above it in order to see Serpent Mound properly. Fortunately, that day, Santa had brought a drone. Santa and I are electronically challenged, but we had friends with us, and they helped us to get that drone running. Santa took it up to 400 feet and started taking pictures. And suddenly, Serpent Mound, that's the spiral of its tail, suddenly Serpent Mound came alive. There's the serpent, and there's the serpent's head. It's an amazing structure. 400 feet, that's where you want to be to look at it. And it seems to be seeking the sun, looking towards the sun. Why is that? Sun and shadow. The Ohio History Connection, who maintained this park, really love trees. I love trees too, but I don't think the trees should be there. And I don't think they were there in antiquity. The serpent needs to see the horizon, not be crowded in so that visitors can have some shade. See how the trees block the horizon, but there's something going on over here. Well, Jeffrey Wilson, who was one of the guys with us there at Serpent Mound that day, does a lot of LiDAR work, and he's produced a LiDAR graphic of Serpent Mound. We can see the whole orientation of it here. Look at that head. And here's some ancient maps. There's Serpent Mound. So there's a kind of cliff here that it sits on top of, a ridge. And you come down the side of this ridge, and you can walk along Brush Creek here, walk along the edges of Brush Creek. And when you do, I'm there with Ross Hamilton, by the way, another great researcher in this field. He's done, fantastic book on Serpent Mound, highly recommended. He's showing me a megalith at the side of the path. It's small. It would be amongst the smaller megaliths at Stonehenge or Avebury. But just beyond that megalith, there's the megalith, there's this curious outcrop. Okay, this rocky outcrop. And I'm going to just make it easy to see what travelers have seen and reported in dozens of reports that I could quote you and do quote in the book. What they've seen is this. That's the unenhanced image, and that's the enhanced image of the serpent's head simulacrum at Serpent Mound. And it explains why so many travelers and the ancients before them could imagine this natural rocky outcrop as the head of a serpent. And there's the juxtaposition of the head of the Serpent Mound and that rocky outcrop underneath it. So let's go back there. We're there on a special day. We're there on the 21st of June, the summer solstice. Actually, we're there at the very closest moment to the summer solstice sunset, which is in fact the night of the 20th of June, 2017. And the serpent clearly is looking at that setting sun. And indeed, as William Romaine has scientifically confirmed, the primary alignment of Serpent Mound is to the summer solstice sunset. And in the reverse direction, it targets the winter solstice sunrise. Two other convolutions target respectively the equinox sunrise and the summer solstice sunrise. So what we have here is a natural ridge that was naturally oriented, pointing towards the setting sun on the summer solstice. And the ancients who observed nature and who observed our beautiful garden of a planet and who were so much closer to the earth than we were, they didn't miss that. They didn't miss that. This was a place where Mother Earth spoke to sky, earth and sky, speaking in communion. Let's honor that. Let's celebrate it. Let's create a beautiful serpentine mound on that serpentine ridge. Let's play our part as human beings in gardening the earth and allowing the earth to be again part of the universe that spawned it. Oddly enough, the same thing has now been discovered to have happened at Stonehenge. It was long believed that the great Sarsens at Stonehenge were all brought 20 miles from the Marlborough Downs. A lot of people wondered, why did they do that? Why didn't they just build Stonehenge on Marlborough Downs? Why drag them 20 miles? Turns out that two of those Sarsens were always in position at Stonehenge, naturally in position. And they are Stone 16 and the Heel Stone. And the line between Stone 16 and the Heel Stone, by chance, is one of those lines where Earth speaks to sky. You can watch the summer solstice sunrise looking this way, and you can watch the winter solstice sunset looking this way. And observing that, the ancients said, let's honor this place where Earth speaks to sky. Let's create a huge stone circle here. And they brought those other megaliths from the Marlborough Downs. So Serpent Mound and Stonehenge are doing the same thing, and I refuse to believe that they're doing it by coincidence. We are looking at the traces of an ancient global system which manifests in the Americas and manifests all over the world. So there's the LiDAR, there's the summer solstice sunset, and here's, I'm just going to run quickly through these last slides. We're up at 400 feet again. Samantha's got the drone sitting in the right place, and she's just taking pictures. And we're going to watch that sun going down. And here's a line from the ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead. Men praise thee in thy name of Ra, and they swear by thee. For thou art Lord over them. Thou hearest with thine ears, and thou seest with thine eyes. Millions of years have gone over the world. I cannot tell the number of those through which thou hast passed. Thou dost pass over and dost travel through untold spaces, requiring millions and hundreds of thousands of years to pass over. Thou passest through them in peace, and thou steerest thy way across the watery abyss to the place which thou lovest. This thou doest in one little moment of time, and then thou dost sink down and dost make an end of the hours. It's the ancient Egyptian book of... Well, I think America is the key to Earth's lost civilization. And I think it's that key for two principal reasons. Firstly, because of the isolation of the Americas. For about 12,000 years, until the time of Columbus, the Americas truly were isolated. If there were visitors from other places, they didn't leave a strong genetic footprint. 12,000 years of isolation. That means that anything that we find in common in terms of cultural memes between America and the old world has to be more than 12,000 years old. Its origin has to go back before the separation of peoples. And then we have to ask ourselves what happened in America. This is the second reason, because there was a global cataclysm, as Randall outlined this morning, 12,800 years ago. And North America was the absolute epicenter of that global cataclysm. And Vance Haynes, despite his adamant insistence on Clovis first, noticed this very clearly, the way that the Clovis and the megafauna were destroyed in a geological incident. So I went to Murray Springs with Alan West, and he's showing me the black mat that Randall showed this morning. And in Alan's phrase, Alan is one of the geophysicists working on the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. In his phrase, the black mat is wrapped like shrink wrap over the last remains of Clovis and the megafauna. It marks a distinct moment, the extermination of the megafauna and the end of the Clovis culture. And in that black mat, it's full of impact proxies that speak of a cosmic impact. And I'm just going to run through these very, very quickly. The group of more than 60 scientists who are working on the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis have faced a great deal of savage criticism and undermining attacks from those who are jealous and envious of the work that they've done. Unfortunately, science is full of jealousy and envy. But they have done extraordinary work, and we should listen carefully to what they have to say. I'm not saying it's the only answer to the problem, but I think it's out there at the moment that we had a cosmic impact 12,800 years ago that brought on these devastating earth changes. And there I am with Randall at Dry Falls, Channel Scablands, part of the massive evidence for the giant cataclysm that struck North America 12,800 years ago. 12,800 years ago, at the sudden onset of the geological epoch known as the Younger Dryas, North America was the epicenter of a global cataclysm. The cataclysm itself isn't in doubt, but arguments continue as to what caused it. My own position, since I published Magicians of the Gods in 2015, is absolutely clear. I'd bet my last dollar that it was the result of the Earth's collision with a swarm of cometary debris. This is the essence of the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, which is the ongoing work of more than 60 leading scientists. I have no objection to the sun being involved as well. It certainly would have been if parts of the swarm had gone on to hit the sun, sparking massive solar flare. But I'm not going to get into that debate here. Randall Carson has already spoken this morning. Robert Schoch will speak on his subject of a solar-induced dark age this afternoon. And Randall and I will discuss the whole matter thoroughly on stage this evening for the benefit of the audience. We will miss the valued presence of Robert Schoch on stage with us. We did ask him to join us and hope that perhaps he might still have a change of heart. I think it's the one place that nobody's looked, and it's the one place we need to look seriously. The epicenter of the global cataclysm, cut off from the current of old world affairs for 12,000 years, yet sharing this incredible science, geometry, astronomy, all these shared memes. There must be a remote common source, an ancestor civilization that passed all of this down. We're not looking at direct influence of the old world on the new or vice versa. We're looking at them being descendants of the same parents. That's what we're looking at. And that's what this book is all about. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you. You're very kind. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely amazing. We owe a great debt to the intellectual researchers, the academics, the people that are connecting the myths of the past with the science of the past. We owe a great debt to people like Graham Hancock, Randall Carlson, Andrew Collins, Greg Little, and Dr. Robert Schock. These are people that are putting light into the shadow, and we owe a great debt to these people, and we thank them for their life work and for their service. Another round of applause for the amazing Graham Hancock, please.